Welcome to the Green Building Show, where we investigate green design and building trends throughout Australia.
The great outdoors just got greater. With the weather warming up and the holiday season on its way, we turn our minds to entertaining family and friends and making the most out of our outdoor spaces, particularly the decked areas. So this week on the Green Building Show, we talk to Hilton Saintclair of Hilton Building about what's new and what's possible for your tile decking DIY project. With us today, talking to us about everything we need to know about decking and your outdoor areas for a big DIY project here. Hilton from Hilton Build, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, there seems to be a bit of a trend with building outdoor decking areas to very much mirror your indoors, the indoor-outdoor living space. Is this something you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of getting rid of the decking and tiling it and doing that. Yeah, absolutely. It does seem to be a bit more common today than it used to be.
Are there any tricks that you kind of need to be aware of while people are attempting this?
Well, I think firstly, when you rip up the old decking, to make sure that the existing structure is stable. It hasn't been eaten by termites. It's not rotted away. Possibly even getting a professional in just to make sure that that is sound. If you don't feel comfortable making that decision, but once that's been sorted out and termites sprayed and made sure that that's all been taken care of, I think then you can move on to the next stage.
So let's establish here, we're not talking about building a new deck, we're going to talk about building on an existing deck.
Yep.
So if you pulled the surface off the old deck,
yep.
And you're about to put tiles down on, now I imagine tiles are pretty heavy for starters.
That's right, yep.
So what are we looking at to ascertain that this surface is okay to build on?
Okay, so the first thing is to make sure that the foundations, the footings, the posts in the ground, or if they're sitting on the pads, that the pads are stable, that it hasn't sunken. To make sure that it can take this load, because decking is quite light, so if you're going to put compressed fibro cement sheet over the top of your new structure or your old structure, and then you've got to put your tiles and before you put your tiles you do your sand and cement bed, and that's all quite a bit of weight. So you've got to make sure that the structure that's there is strong enough to take that weight.
And so what would be the visual cues that may or may not be strong enough?
Well, you could probably look at the timbers, how far they're spanning, but without supports. So in other words, are they spanning anything over 2 meters without a support? Usually I like to try and keep it up to about 1,500 with a bearer underneath. So you've got your joist on top, you've got the bearer underneath. The bearer is what basically supports the floor joist going across. If it's over 2 meters and you have a look at the bearers and they start sinking a little bit like that, then you know that obviously over time they've warped and they're not strong enough, and then definitely wouldn't go ahead with putting anything heavier on top.
Yep.
If it is sound, like if it is at least a 150 or a 200 mil floor joist, that's usually what it would be. And if they look like they're in fairly good condition, then you could probably go ahead. The other thing is to make sure that the joists are at least 450 centers apart. So they used to in the old days put them 600.
Yeah.
So make sure that they're 450 centers apart.
If they're not, what can you do?
If they're not, you can just basically drop a couple of ones the same thickness in, joists in, same timbers. You just get that down at your local hardware, lock it in, and then that way for the compressed fibro sheet, it's less movement, because when you tile on compressed fibro, you don't want the deck to be moving, because it'll just pop the tiles off.
Okay.
So you've got to make sure that that the structure is nice and sound. There's no bouncing. There's not too much moving. To make sure that once you put your FC sheet down, it's a 15 mil compressed fibro. You screw that down at 150 centers.
Yep.
All the way along, and then you stagger the sheets all the way.
By stagger them, you mean so they're not all at the one?
So they're not all in a row. So you'll have one that'll start here, and you'll have one that starts halfway.
Okay.
And then you'll put another one here, and then you'll just keep staggering like that. That way it strengthens the joints, because if you have all the joints running along in one area, it's a weak point. So you stagger them, and that sort of strengthens the base that you're putting down. The 150, screwing them at 150 centers all the way along the floor joist is basically, that just really stabilizes it. Like, some people like to put it at 600 centers or whatever, and it allows for a bit of movement. Once again, you don't want movement at all. Once you've got that down, outside it's not compulsory, but I tend to like to waterproof the top of the FC sheeting. You can just buy an external waterproofing bucket from places like Bunnings or whatever. It's just just an elastic, basically, once it dries. And you just basically waterproof 2 coats.
Is it paint on?
Yeah, you just paint it on, or you put it on with a roller or something. And that dries pretty quick. Within 2 hours you can recoat it, so within a day that's done.
While we're on the level of the substrate, is there anything else that we should be mindful of while all that sort of stuff's exposed? I mean, anything like fire retardations or termite or rot or anything like that you could do?
Okay, well, fire, the FC sheeting is fire resistant, so that's not an issue. So the existing structure is probably what you'd have to look at. As far as termites, you'll see if there's active termites there, just with a little nest just growing up the side of the timber. Generally, when they have the posts coming up, they have termite little barriers. If it doesn't have termite barriers, then you probably would want to get a pest guy in. There's so many different chemicals today that they either spray the ground and it lasts 10 years, or you can put traps right around your deck. And that trap just gets fed with poison every 6 months, and it just slowly filters out. So when the termites come and they hit that trap, it sort of, chases them away. So those are things. It's probably quite a good practice just to get that done before you even start any work, just to make sure, for the future that doesn't happen.
Okay. So let's go back up onto the surface area we've built now.
Yep.
So it's rigid. We've established that now. It's not going to move.
It's not going to move.
Now, are you working at a complete flat level here, or
the deck probably would have been put in. The structure's probably going to be level if it was done properly. So it'll be level. So it's best to just keep it simple. Put your FC sheet down on the flat surface, screw it down. Don't try and pack it on an angle, because you're just going to make it difficult when you're tiling.
So some people might go for an angle though, as a bit of a fall for
water. Yeah, but generally what we do is we put it down flat, screw it down, secure it, waterproof it, and then when you put down your tiles, that's when you build it up with your sand and cement. Or your different glues, depending on how big the deck is. So if it was a 1500 deck, you could build that up with an elastic glue, and you can just get basically on 1500, I'd probably have at least a 15-20 mil fall away from the house. And if it's a further stretch, then you just up it then at 10 mil every meter. Yeah. So and you can do it with sand and cement. So you just mix sand and cement with a bit of glue, which is called Bondec. So you mix it with it, that just basically strengthens it from wanting to crack or anything. And you put that down, you get it with your nice level, and you just get a nice straight level all the way down to nothing at the edge. And let it go hard, and then the next day you're ready to tile.
And some people talk about dry fitting the tiles first, just to check that all the tiles fit exactly where they're meant to be.
Well, yeah, you can do that, or you just do it mathematically. So you actually get onto the deck and you have a look what the length of the deck is, what tiles all add up to, and then you'll work out what size cuts you're going to have. So you can either, if you're going to have 2 small sections, you can maybe have a small one to start with and a small one to finish with. Or you can start with a full one, and if it doesn't bother you at the end of the deck to have the cut, then you can put the cuts at the end. But those you can just mark once you put your sand and cement down. You can actually just physically mark it out just with a spirit level and a ruler, and tape measure and everything. So
saves you a lot of heavy lifting of tiles.
Yeah, rather than move, just extra work.
Yeah, understood. So look, you could obviously bring a tiler in, but if you're looking at a DIY project and you want to do it yourself, selecting tiles for outdoor areas. Any kind of rule of thumb that you need to follow?
No, you can go anything. You can go. I probably wouldn't use porcelain outside. Then you can, but otherwise ceramics or stone, natural stone, or sometimes people even use concrete. The little concrete pavers, concrete paver stones and stuff.
And the grouting as well. Is there any kind of sense that it needs to be waterproofed or?
No. So once you've waterproofed underneath, grout tends to be fairly waterproof. And if you're using like a natural stone or a cement paver as you're tiling, then you would seal that once you're done anyway. So you would grout it all, and then you buy a paving sealer or a natural stone sealer, and then you would just seal the whole lot. Whereas ceramic and porcelain are already sealed, so there's no necessary.
Fantastic. Now, time. What sort of time frames are we talking about for a project like this?
So if everything runs smoothly, so if your structure's sound and you just have to put the FC sheet down, and then once again, depending on the size of the deck is how long it's going to take. So if it was, let's say an 8 square meter deck, that could be something that you could, in one day you would get the sheets down. The next day you'd probably do your waterproofing, and the following day your sand and cement, and the following day you can put down your tiles. So you could have it all down within 4 or 5 days.
Fantastic. And when's it ready to walk on?
The next day.
Fantastic.
So after you've tiled, the next day you can walk on it.
Okay, and I know there's a lot of variables when it actually comes to price.
Yep.
But let's just kind of hit the middle of the market for a DIY project if you're not actually having to pay for any of the tradies or labour.
And you're doing it yourself. Well, it comes down to, so compressed fibro is usually about $150 a sheet, and a sheet can be about 1,500 by 1,200. But you get all different sizes. I wouldn't go too big because they're really, really heavy.
Okay.
So the smaller sheets are just easier to manage. You might have a few more joins, but it doesn't really matter when it's outside. And then your tile then comes down to the tiles you use. If you just go your basic ceramic tiles, you could get them anything from $20 to $50 a square meter. If you go nice natural stone, it could be anything from $100 to $500 a square meter. And then stone cement pavers are fairly cheap as well. You could probably do them for about 30 or 40 square meter.
Okay, fantastic. Any other dangers or any other things to keep in mind when building on these sort of things outside? I mean, electrical wires, plumbing, things.
Well, if you're doing a really, really big deck and you don't want the water to just run off into the garden because you've got things that, you've got an area where you don't want it just to get gushed. Sometimes what we do is we tend to put, you get a plumber in and you can put a drain pipe in the middle.
Yep.
And take it away. Otherwise, you can just have it running off at the end of the deck and just allow for all that water to go off at one go. You could even put, depending on how you make it, you can even put a grate right at the end, and that could run into a tank, which would be storage water for the garden.
Nice.
So those are options. And once again, it just really depends on the deck, how high it's off the ground.
Yep.
And what accessibility you have underneath. Wires and stuff, if you see any wires, I definitely get a licensed electrician in to make sure that that's disconnected and taken care of.
And also, with a structure like this, do you need council approval to be building these?
Generally you do, but depending on where it is, there might have been a deck there prior. So like if the deck is already there, obviously just lifting the decking boards off and putting FC sheet down is not an issue because it's an existing and that's not an issue. But if there's nothing there and you want to build a whole new deck, it really depends on your council, so you need to check on that one.
Check out that first. Hilton, thank you so much for your time.
That's okay, no problem.
Wish people all the best on building their decks.